with some preset options. So on the top right, all the way past the inspector, in the corner, you can see this little button that says default. So in fact, if I left click on that, and since I move things around, if I click on the default button again, it'll reset my entire editor experience to be back to what we had in the very beginning. And then if I click on the default option again, there's other options. So there's a 2x3, which is kind of cool. There's a 4 split. So this is kind of useful, especially if you're doing like a 2D game or something like that. There's a tall layout. And so this one puts our scene view and our game view side by side, which is kind of useful. We have a much larger view of what is happening. So I actually kind of like the tall view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange some things a little bit. So I'm going to make our inspector just a bit smaller. So you see these lines between the windows. You can actually mouse over them. It turns into this little drag icon. And then you can click and drag our inspector. So I'll make that a bit smaller. I'm actually going to make our hierarchy and our project column a little bit smaller too. So I'll click and drag. Now our project window is kind of messy now. So what I could do is all the way at the bottom right of our project window, there's this little slider at the bottom. So this actually makes our icons larger if I drag it to the right. If I drag it all the way to the left, it actually makes it smaller. So then I can like double click on these instead, and then it'll just create list views of what I can see. But I don't get those cool little previews of our little assets, unfortunately. And then it's still kind of it's still kind of narrow. If I had longer names, it'd be really hard to see. So in fact, I'm just going to turn this into one column entirely instead of having these two small columns. So in my project window, all the way on the right side, there's this tiny drop down. And if you're using a new version of Unity, you'll see 3 dots in a vertical line. So if I click on that, you can see there's a 2 column layout or there's a 1 column layout. So if I click on the 1 column, now it gets rid of my folder previews for what I can see inside my vehicles folder. So now instead, I just have to click on these little drop down arrows and then it shows me all of the different assets that I can use. Same thing with the obstacles. The nice thing too is it makes it a little bit easier if I collapse the vehicles folder and then I can even collapse my course library. Now it like looks really clean, which is helpful. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to left click and drag the game window, and I'm actually going to drag it to the bottom of our view, and it pops like that. Now, one thing that might happen is, for example, if you actually drag it out of a space where there's anywhere it could snap to, it'll actually pop out like this, which can be helpful sometimes, but not entirely ideal. So you can actually just click on that tab again, drag it back, and then snap it in place. And now if we make this a bit larger, cool. Now we have a really good view of our game and our scene at the same time. So this is what we as the creator see versus what our player will see when they play the game. And then if we want to actually save this all the way on the right side back to where we set our layouts, if you click on that, at the bottom of the options is actually a save layout. So if I click on save layout, I can rename. So I'll call this my layout. So now I have my layout saved to use whenever I want. So that's super handy. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on my layout and you can select one of the different layouts that you think is cool. In this case, I went with the tall layout and then I dragged out by clicking on the game tab and then dragging it down to the bottom, snapped it to the bottom of our scene view. So now we have both views together. I resized my inspector and my hierarchy just so there's more space. And then because our project window got a bit cluttered because it's pretty small down here, on the project window, all the way on the right side, you see this little drop down. If I click on that, there's an option to select one column layout. And so now all of our folders are just in these columns, and I can just expand them and collapse them to see what's inside. Now it's your turn.
Okay, I did this before, and I agree. I like the tall layout. I do it pretty much the exact same way, with the exception of I, I like the opposite. I like this over. Yeah, I like everything over here. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Okay. One column. I agree on that wholeheartedly. So, boom. Sorry, that's right. Spectre goes at the top. Hierarchy goes at the bottom. Alright. There we go. Okay. And boom, boom, boom. And a little tight, but there we go. Yeah, it's a little, there we go. There we go. I believe this is how I had it last time. I don't. Yeah, there we go. All right. All right. It is. This is how I want it. So go and say. How do you? Oh, project save layout. One of these is it. Okay. We may have to. There we go. All right. And of course, email and save. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we need to do boop. And there we go. That's what we want. And we can rotate it down a little bit. So we have to do boom. Zoom out. Per perfect. Perfect. Alright, now save. Okay, I am happy. Everything's set up. Alright, let's move. Let's mark this as done and let's move on to the next one. Alright. Mark as completed. And now let's do the recap.
Alright, so we've made it to the end of this lesson. As a recap, we've learned a lot of new functionality, so we got our first project set up and imported so that we can use all of the different assets available to us, like our obstacles or our vehicles. We learned how to position our objects, so in this case, we have our vehicle at the origin
What
of
the
our world, and
fuck?
then we moved our box just a little bit down the road here. And we also learned how to position our camera and even use our rotation tool so that we have a better position and view of how our game will look to our players. We learned some new concepts and skills like creating a new project, importing all of our assets, adding objects to our scene, We learned about the difference between our scene view for setting up our
I hope
environment
I didn't leave
for
a
our
fan on.
player and
It might.
creating our
I
stage
didn't mute. I'm so sorry.
versus our game view, which is
I'm
what
gonna
our
start the
players
video over.
experience when they're in the
I'm gonna
game.
start the video over. I
We
didn't know I
learned
didn't
about
mute.
all
Sorry.
the different windows, like our hierarchy or our project. Alright, so we've made it to the end of this lesson. As a recap, we've learned a lot of new functionality, so we got our first project set up and imported so that we can use all of the different assets available to us, like our obstacles or our vehicles. We learned how to position our objects, so in this case, we have our vehicle at the origin of our world, and then we moved our box just a little bit down the road here. And we also learned how to position our camera and even used our rotation tool so that we have a better position and view of how our game will look to our player. We learned some new concepts and skills, like creating a new project, importing all of our assets, adding objects to our scene. We learned about the difference between our scene view for setting up our environment for our player and creating our stage versus our game view, which is what our players experience when they're in the game. We learned about all of the different windows, like our hierarchy or our project directory, our inspector, even moved them around and made our own custom layout. We learned how we can navigate around 3D space and all of the different tools that we can use to be able to interact with all of our different objects. In the next lesson, we'll make this project really interactive by writing our very first line of code in C# to make the vehicle move down this road and interact with our obstacle in the scene. We'll see you in the next lesson.
Sorry about that. My room gets a little hot. I forgot to put the fan on, and I forgot to mute. But there we got the whole video clean. So that's our recap. Let's go through it. New functionality. Project setup with assets imported. Vehicle position at the start of the road. Obstacle position in front of the vehicle. Camera position behind vehicle. New concepts and skills. Create a new project. Import assets. Add objects to the scene. Game versus scene view. Project hierarchy inspector windows. Navigate 3D space. Move and rotate tools. Customize the layout. And in the next lesson, we'll really make this interactive by writing our first line of code in C# to make the vehicle move and have it collide with other objects in the scene. So let's move on. Let's actually get to some programming. This is the thing that I am very most interested in. Um, so let's move on to the next item. I am caught up. So for here on out, I have not done anything past this lesson. So we're in this together. And by together, it's be by myself because no one's here. Wee! Not bitter at all. Okay. Okay, here we go. Summary. Overview. In this lesson, you will make your driving simulator come alive. First, you will write your very first lines of code in C#, changing the vehicle's position and allowing it to move forward. Next, you will add physics components to your objects, allowing them to collide with one another. Lastly, you will learn how to duplicate objects in the hierarchy and position them along the road. Project outcome. You will have a moving vehicle with its own C# script and a road full of objects, all of which may collide with each other using physics components. And let's get to lesson 1. Create and apply your first script. We'll start this lesson by creating our very first C# script that we control the vehicle's movement. Alright, pedal to the metal, create and apply your first script. Here we go.